So today we're here to talk about the tax rate setting process. This is the final process for this tax year with the Municipal Tax Rate Setting Portal. So we like to start every training off by going through the basic tax rate setting process and all the steps that have led up to this. Obviously, it starts with the drafting of warrant articles, which are a narrative of your proposed appropriations. Those warrant articles are represented numerically in your proposed budget. Your proposed budget contains two key pieces of information: your proposed appropriations and your estimated revenues. Appropriations that are approved by the voters are represented on your MS-232 form, which is your appropriations as voted form. Estimated revenues are brought forward and are represented on the MS-434 form, where you have an opportunity to re-estimate and update those revenues. The thought process being, for most towns that are on calendar year, you estimate your revenues around January or February when you're creating your
5 days.
budget.
I'm not going down there 5 times.
No, this one.
We got some feedback on the line. I'm going to just mute some lines here. The thought process being that you can have a longer time now. You're further into your year. You're 8 or 9 months in, so you have a better idea of what your final estimated revenues will be. And obviously, we did a lot of estimated revenue training, and a lot of you have already submitted that form for the year. So following that process, DRA sets the tax rates. They do that by taking the difference between your voted appropriations and your estimated revenues, and that's the amount to be raised in taxation. And that's divided by the total value of your entity, which is represented on the MS-1 form, which is produced by your assessing department. A lot of MS-1 forms are in so far this year. Some people have filed extensions due to some utility valuation delays. So that calculation of the amount to be raised in taxation divided by your overall value produces a tax rate. Obviously, that tax rate is provided to the entities. They can go out and bill on that. And then following the close of the year, you're asked to file a final financial form of the MS-535, which provides a view of your final expenditures, revenues, fund equity, and long-term debt. So many of you just filled out the form this year in the new system or have an auditor that does it for you. Any questions on the basic process before we move on? And be mindful that some of you might need to chat your questions in if you don't hear me responding to you. Okay. So today we're just going to be focusing on tax rate setting, just that piece in the middle. So that's all we're going to be talking about. There's a lot to it, so it'll probably take us about half an hour to go through the process. Obviously, we do different trainings throughout the year. We're in tax rates. This is the final training, but we're going to be scheduling the budget training for next year very soon. The trainings kind of go back to back to back. So I'm sure many of you are already starting to think about your budgets for next year at this point. What we're going to cover today is the location of the tax rate interface, the workflow for tax rates, the actual interface itself and how it works, dealing with your fund balance and overlay calculations, viewing draft and final forms, and then the DRA approval process. So I'm going to be doing some PowerPoint slides, and then I'll also be doing a live web demo on our demonstration server. So the interface can be located if you're on the home page and logged into the system by either selecting the tax rate tab at the top of the screen or by selecting the continue button to the right of the tax rate description. Both of those take you to the same place. Once you get there, you're at the tax rate home screen. It's really the gateway to the tax rate information. You have two options really when you're on the screen. You can either select the green arrow to go into the tax rate calculator, or you can hit the printer icon, which you see there, to launch your tax rate report. Now that can be a draft or final report depending on what step of the process you're in. Also, of course, we see information like what your status is, the total tax rate, and when it was created. So the workflow for tax rates, I know many of you went through this last year, but we always like to revisit this to make sure everyone understands how it works. So your DRA advisor is going to create your initial tax rate, and that's based on the information you've provided so far, including your initial estimates for overlay and fund balance to reduce taxes. Once they create that initial rate, you'll receive an email saying DRA has created your preliminary rate and that you should please log into the system. At that point, the rate is in the possession of the municipality. You may hold the rate as long as you would like. Obviously, the longer you hold it, the longer it's going to take to get a final rate set. At that point, you really have the option to do two things, and that's adjust values for your overlay and your fund balance to reduce taxes. Now, if you attended the estimated revenue training, or if you're just familiar with the process, you have the ability to provide initial estimates for your overlay and fund balance to reduce taxes on your MS 434. In that training, we talk about how that's used just to set your preliminary tax rate, and you'll have a chance to update those values at this point in the process, and I'll show you a demonstration shortly. Many people choose to leave these values as 0 on their MS 434, knowing that they have a chance to update those numbers now. So when we go into the demonstration, I'll talk about the overlay and fund balance to reduce taxes inputs. There's a question coming through. Will the slides for the presentation be available, or will the slides of this presentation be available afterwards? Yes, they will be, and I'm actually recording this presentation as well, and it will also go on the help interface. So you'll be able to get access to the slides and a full-length training video if you'd like to return to it. So once you finish as a municipality tweaking your overlay and fund balance to reduce taxes, and you're happy with the rate, or at least accept your rate, you will hit the complete button, and that will send your information back to DRA. At that point, they will do a supervisor review and then a director review. Once the director completes his review, the rate is considered final, and you'll receive a notification saying the tax rate has been set and you have a final tax rate. At that point, you'll be able to print off your final tax rate report. The tax rate will be visible to you, so meaning the calculator will be visible when you control the rate as a municipality and when the rate is set. When the advisor's working on the rate and the supervisor's reviewing it, the tax rate is not visible to you. You will be able to run the draft report, but you won't be able to get into the calculator. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a moment or two. I'll unmute all lines in case there are any questions so far on what we've talked about. Okay. So the interface itself, when you get into the tax rate interface, there are 4 primary tabs: Appropriations and Revenues, Tax Base, Overlay and Surplus, and this is where you'll be doing your municipal value inputs, and the Information tab.
Great.
Not if we have it shut off.
I have some feedback here. Let me just mute the lines. Each tab has a tax rate calculation on the bottom, which can be minimized, and I'll show you what I mean by that. And we'll go through each of these tabs in the live demonstration as well. When you first go in as an entity, you'll be brought to the Overlay and Surplus tab. And what we have up top is the page-specific content. So this is the Overlay and Surplus calculation. And then at the bottom of all of these pages, we have the tax rate table, which shows the actual tax rate calculation. And you can actually minimize this bottom part of the page if you'd like to as well, and only see the top page content. When we go into the live demonstration, I'll be able to kind of tie this whole thing together for you. The tax rate table itself provides you with the basic calculation that you're interested in: municipal, county, local, and state ed, initial tax effort, your tax base, and the tax rate. There's also the final tax effort, which for all entities except the municipality will be the same as the initial effort, and I'm going to explain how that works momentarily. I'm going to come to a slide in a minute, but I'll elaborate a little bit on that. Essentially, as you do this very large calculation, there are fractional pennies that come out through the rounding process. And since the municipality guarantees to the county and the school districts a certain amount of money that they'll receive, the rounding from the calculation is taken out on the final tax effort of the municipality. And there is a clear calculation that shows exactly how the rounding occurs, and we'll go through that in more detail. But that's really the difference between initial and final tax effort, is on the municipal line, you have the impact of rounding. Like I said before, as a municipality, when you go in, you'll be taken right to the Overlay and Surplus tab, and there'll be 2 values that you can adjust: the fund balance to reduce taxes and the requested overlay. Adjusting those 2 values, you can hit the recalculate button, and it will show you the global impact to your tax rate. Obviously, fund balance to reduce taxes is money you're taking out of fund balance to offset your tax rate, and a requested overlay is some amount of funds on top of your voted appropriations that you're using to make sure the municipality can cover its obligations in the case of abatements, low remittance of taxes, and other issues that may occur. There is a max allowable overlay, and there are fund balance retention guidelines, and we'll go over those, and the interface does provide you with those calculations. But essentially, to boil this whole thing down for you, when DRA sets your initial rate and hands it to you, you have the opportunity to adjust two values: the fund balance to reduce taxes and the requested overlay. Once you make those adjustments, you provide the rate back to DRA. Here is the municipal interface. This is what I talked about before. When you go in as a municipality, you'll be taken to the Overland Surplus tab. Here's your line for fund balance to reduce taxes, and here's the line for overlay. So we talked about what an overlay is. It's some amount that you apply on top of your vote appropriations to deal with unforeseen circumstances, or maybe foreseen circumstances like abatements. So we're going to show a sample calculation here. So let's say we started with an initial overlay of $5,900. We have a tax effort of approximately $776,000 and of a tax base of $15.45 million. So the tax rate calculation is very simple. We just take the tax effort and divide it by the tax base and multiply it by 100. So if we follow this calculation out, we would get a tax rate of $5.022 right here. But of course, we can't get fractional pennies, so we would round this rate down. It would be $5.02. The problem when you're talking about calculations that use millions or billions is that when you remove this fractional penny, it actually ends up being some recognizable amount of money that's not just fractional pennies when you multiply this back out. So what we'll do is reverse the equation, and we'll say here we have a tax rate of $5.02. And instead of solving for a tax rate, we're now going to solve for a tax effort. So we reverse the equation and we say the tax effort equals the tax rate times the tax base divided by 100. So if we reverse this equation and solve for tax effort, we come up with a tax effort of $775,590 because of the rounding of the 5.02. Now, when we round that number out and we multiply it by 15.45 million, it becomes some appreciable amount of money, in this case, $310. So essentially, rounding has decreased our tax effort by $310. So the place where that is applied is on the overlay. So a final overlay is calculated of $5,590. So I know this can look a little confusing. It's not something you really need to be overly concerned with, but we always take the opportunity in tax rate training to explain how rounding impacts the final overlay and why you'll see an initial and final overlay on the screen. Any questions about the overlay or the rounding calculation?
They do it with the figures I give.
Okay, doesn't sound like we had any questions. If people do, please feel free to type them in. I have muted the line just because we were getting feedback. So this is what you're going to see in the interface itself. You're going to request an overlay. That's the amount you requested. And this is the result of rounding, a $462 increase, which is then applied to the overlay. So the overlay ends up being $462 more than you requested. Rounding can go up or down depending on there's no clear formula. It all depends on what those fractional pennies end up being and if you end up rounding up or down. So you might change your overlay by $10 and all of a sudden your overlay becomes negative instead of positive. So it's really, the only way to do it is through trial and error, and it's an iterative process. And I'll show you once we get to the interface how you can kind of work through that. So like I said before, really what this whole thing boils down to is you get a chance to update your fund balance to reduce taxes and work on your overlay. And once that's done, you just hit the complete button and send the rate back to DRA. I know that for a lot of people, if you already entered your fund balance and overlay on your 434 and those numbers you're happy with, all you need to do is review the rate and send it back to DRA. I know there's a lot of discussion of, so far about how things work, and we only do that to make sure everyone's clear on the process. So let's go over to the demonstration. I'm going to log in, and this is our development server. I'm actually going to do this in 2016 because we have all the data prepped. So I'm going to go to the tax rate home. And here what I can see is my one tax rate. It says preliminary rate, and that means that DRA set a preliminary rate, and it's now mine to work with. I see my total tax rate and when it was created. So first of all, if I want to, I can hit the printer icon and generate a tax rate report for myself. This is a draft. It has the draft watermark on it. I could run it out to PDF if I wanted and look at all the information and say, all right, this is what DRA did to set my tax rate so far. And we'll go over the report in detail in a few minutes. But I really want to go into the interface itself so I can understand what's happening. So here I am in the Overlay and Surplus interface. We can see the fund balance to reduce taxes right here and our adjusted over, or in our requested overlay, excuse me. These are the two values that I can update as I see fit. What I want to do is walk you through the 4 tabs so you understand exactly what the information is and how to interpret it. So if I go to the Appropriations and Revenue tab, and remember here we have the tax rate table at the bottom of the screen. If I hit the Hide Tax Rate Table button, it's just going to hide that from me. So what we have on the Appropriations and Revenue tab is a breakdown by municipal, county, local, state ed, and village of all the pieces that get to your required tax effort. So this is really the summation of all the work you've been doing throughout the year to get to a tax effort. So we see our total appropriations from the 232, our net revenues from the 434, our fund balance voted surplus, so the amount we voted from fund balance from the 434, fund balance to reduce taxes, our war service credits from the MS1, any special adjustments that DRA makes, and they don't make special adjustments often. It's really just a line that we put in there just in case something special has to be done, and the approximate overlay that was used. Now you can see the fund balance to reduce taxes and the approximate overlay are 0, and that's because when we filled out our MS 434, we left those as 0, knowing we could update them when we got to this form. So that's the municipal required tax effort. The county is an apportioned value, so that's just going to be a single value that gets entered. On the local ed tab, you'll see any information from local schools and then from regional schools. So here we can see Newfound Area is the regional, that's our apportioned value. And then down below, we see the education grant and our state education tax that's retained. And that gets us to our net required effort. State education tax, we see the amount we raise. It's all retained, so this is just a placeholder line in case distribution of state ed ever is to return. And then we see our state ed net tax effort. Same thing with village districts. In this case, Alexandria does not have any village districts, but if it did, you would see their net amount to be raised in taxation, which if it's an apportioned village will be single value. If it's not apportioned, you'll see their MS 232 and 434 values here. The tax base tab essentially is just showing you MS1 information. This is your total assessed value with utilities and without utilities from the MS1. So it shows current year and then prior year. Overlay and surplus is the tab where you will do your work, and we talked about that already, but we'll come back to it in a moment. The information tab just includes some things that you might want to know, like your general operating expenditure, the fund balance retention guidelines, which are 5 to 17%. You can see those retention guidelines here. The amount of fund balance that we'd have to use to reduce our taxes by 10 cents, 50 cents, or $1. So that's really just informational, basically saying if you want to reduce your fund balance by 10 cents, or excuse me, your tax rate by 10 cents, use approximately $20,000 in fund balance. And then down below, we have the final table, which shows your prior year tax rate, your current year tax rate, and your current year tax rate with last year's assessed values. And this is an important column to note And what it really shows is there are two sides of the equation for tax rate calculation. There's what does the municipality want to spend and what are your obligations and how much is all the property in the municipality worth. And what this is showing you is the impact of assessed value on your tax rate. So it's basically saying if we take this year's rates, but we use last year's assessed values, we see that the rate actually would have gone up. Or excuse me, gone down. My apologies. The rate would have gone down because we had higher assessed values last year. So that's all informational, and that's why it's included on the information tab. So what are the big things that you're going to want to do? Number one, you're going to want to look at your unassigned fund balance calculation. What it's showing us is our unassigned fund balance, anything that we voted out of fund balance during annual meeting, any emergency appropriations, our fund balance to reduce taxes, and our total retained fund balance. So we have $513,000 approximately in fund balance. What I can also see is that's about 10.6% retention. That falls right in the middle of the guidelines between 5 and 17%. What it also tells me is that if I want to use, $125,000 now from fund balance to reduce taxes, I can do that. So what I'm going to do is do that, enter my 125,000, hit the calculate button, and now you'll see my tax rate just dropped. It went down to $20.57. I think we were at 21 and change, which I can find out if I zero this back out. We started at 21.19. So I'm going to put in my 125,000, hit calculate, and now you can see we still have a good retention. We're within the guidelines. And our tax rate has dropped from 21.19 to 20.57. So that's one side of the equation. The other side is the requested overlay. I know I'm going to have some abatements coming, and I say, I really want to have about $12,000 in requested overlay. Knowing when I add money to the overlay, my tax rate's going to go up. So at this point, I can hit the calculate button. I see my tax rate jump to 2063. If I scroll down, I can see the breakout of my tax rate. I can see the individual elements of it. And I can also see my final overlay based on rounding. So in using a $12,000 overlay, it actually resulted in $2,000 of rounding increase, which obviously has to be applied to the overlay as we discussed previously. So what I can see here is now my final tax effort, all the rounding is applied right here to this line. So I can see the difference between my initial and final tax effort right there. And that equals approximately that $2,067. I'm going to unmute all the lines. Are there any questions so far?
I think JS card looks like it's about to fall apart.
No questions? Okay. So, your board might want to do this cooperatively. We've seen that, some people actually go into select board meetings and they open the interface and walk through what the rate is. If you see a requested overlay or an initial fund balance to reduce taxes when you go into the interface, that's because that was the value that was provided on your MS-434, and we're just carrying it forward. You have full control over adjusting these values, provided you stay within the guidelines. There's obviously a max allowable overlay, and you know what the fund retention guidelines are. If you go out of the fund retention guidelines, DRA is going to ask you about it. It is completely up to the municipality regarding how much fund balance you want to retain. Some municipalities typically retain less than 5%, and that's just the way they conduct their business. DRA will warn you and say, you're below the recommended guideline, but that is your choice. The max allowable overlay is a hard limit, though. You cannot go over that max allowable. And as you can see, that max allowable is quite high. So, all right, I have the tax rate kind of where I want it now. I feel good about it. I say, what if I change this to 12,500? How does that impact my overlay rounding? Now I can see it actually dropped my rounding a little bit, but in the end, it ends up being about the same amount of money if we consider the difference between overlay and the rounding. So say, all right, I'm happy. This looks good. I want to keep this as my rate. I can save it and go back to the home screen and launch the report if I want. At this point, I can also go back in and say, I'm happy with this tax rate, and I want to ship it off to DRA. At that point, I'll just click the complete municipal review. You'll have this thing that comes up, the pop-up saying that you're submitting your tax rates. you're aware fund balance and overlay are your final amounts, and that you've been advised and recommended against going out of the recommended guidelines. Select OK, and at that point now the tax rate gets shipped off to DRA. The municipal supervisor will conduct their review of the tax rate, and then the director will conduct their final review. Once the directors completed their final review, you'll get an email notification that will signal to you that the final rate's been set. At that point, you can run your final tax rate report. So I'm going to jump back over to our PowerPoint for a minute. We talked about how to print. Obviously, a lot of watermarks on the draft, and those will go away once you get a final rate. Once you receive that email on the final director's rate, you'll want to go into the system and run the tax rate report again. And at that point, you can see it won't have any watermarking. It'll have the director's signature on it and the date it was finalized. So I want to talk about the tax rate report itself. I'm just going to launch this one. We'll look at this one in draft format. So the tax rate report obviously starts with the year up top and your total tax rate. If you see the DRA seal watermarked in the background, it's a draft always. So it starts in the top with the municipal tax rate calculation. We have the tax effort, the valuation, and the rate. Any information about villages, and then we have the tax commitment calculation, which is essentially your municipal tax effort minus any war service credits plus any village district tax efforts. That provides you with your total commitment amount. So this is the total amount that you need to collect in taxes. Page 2 essentially gives a breakdown of the appropriations and revenues that we saw in the application itself. And it basically walks you through how do we get to the net required tax efforts for each piece. So here we can see municipal, county, and local and state ed grouped together. Below that, we see MS1 information, current and prior year, and then any MS1V information from village districts. Once again, this is following the same structure as the tabs we looked at in the interface. How do you get to the net required tax effort? What's the MS1 valuation information? Page 3 is the tax rate commitment verification, and this is a form that will have to be filled out by your tax collector and uploaded into the system. Essentially what this shows is the property tax commitment. By RSA 7610(2), they are allowed to deviate from the the commitment amount by 0.5%. The 0.5% value is shown, and then we see the high and low limits. Essentially, what your tax collector is going to do is enter their commitment amount, enter any information about TIF districts, and then sign and date this form. And then they'll have a place where I'll show you in a minute where they can upload that. There's also a section on the bottom of this page that shows you the amounts for semi-annual billing. If you're annual or quarterly billing, it changes accordingly and shows you the information. But essentially, it shows you your semi-annual rate. So what should you be billing in your first bill? If we had associated villages, it would show us there as well. Then on the final page, we have fund balance retention guidelines. It shows us our general operating expenditure, our final overlay, and then essentially walks us through that fund balance retention section. We have the amount we're retaining and the percentage, and then we see the minimum and maximum recommendations. So you can see we're falling right kind of in the middle here at 8%. We show fund balance retention guidelines for school districts as well. If the school district has passed RSA 198 4B2, they have the ability to retain 2.5% of their fund balance, of their net assessment, and fund balance. This is new in 2016. I'm not sure how many school districts have passed it. Last year there were only maybe 15 or so. But essentially, prior to this, school districts had to provide all of their fund balance to offset the tax rate. So now they do have the ability to retain some of it, once again, if they have passed RSA 198 4B2. So that's the tax rate report itself. I'll unmute the lines. Any questions about the tax rate report? Okay, sounds like there are no questions about it. So I'll go back over to my PowerPoint here. So once again, the requirement after you're done with your tax rate, I know everyone thinks, all right, great, I have my number, I can send out my bills. That is true, but the RA is going to bug you for a few more things. First of all, your signed tax commitment verification, so your 0.5% verification form, signed property tax warrant and summary, or the summary only, and a copy of a final tax bill. It just has to be a final bill, not all of the bills. So if we're in the interface, where you'd load those is on the home screen. You'd go to administrative forms, and here you can see them listed, and you could upload them just following the regular upload process that you use for any other signed document. Here we can see this is last year's information, so here's a signed 0.5% form for Alexandria. And once again, this is going to be filled out by your tax collector. They can upload the form if your tax collector has access, or if they provide you with a copy of the form, anyone else in the town can upload it as well if they have access to the MTRSP. So with that being said, a lot of great resources on the solution knowledge base, which is where the recording we did today will end up going. The knowledge base here is a long web address for it, but really all you need to know is if you hit the help button in the application, it will take you right there, and it walks through everything step by step as references. There's a tax rate settings section that you can go to, has an overview, has how do you walk through the calculator, the home page, the rate setting process, and these help pages kind of walk you through everything. Some of these articles have videos, some don't, depending on what the content is. Also, you can send in a help desk ticket here to our help desk, or call us on the line here. That gives our contact information. So that's all accessible by just selecting the help button in the application. Obviously, your municipal advisor and the municipal supervisor, Bruce Canora, great resources, and everyone here on the Axiomatic Technical Support team. Support at axiomnh.com will also as a place you can submit help desk ticket requests. You can just send an email in and it goes right into our help desk ticket system, or you can call us there on the toll-free number as well. So that's really all I had to go over today. I'd be happy to take any questions if there are any. All right, well, it sounds like there are no questions. I wish everyone the best of luck in going through the process, and if you have questions subsequent to this, please feel free to reach out to us on the technical support team or your advisor or the supervisor, Bruce Canora. So thank you all very much, and have a great weekend.